Hi everyone, we've got another special video for you today. Today we're chatting to Andy Harper, a former footballer in Australia's National Soccer League. He's now a journalist, a writer, a biographer. He's also a good mate of Ange Postecoglou. I'm also a mate of Ange, Andy, mainly because he called me mate once. I'm sure you've been called mate a few times, have you?
In some of his nicer moments, yeah. Um, yeah, look, nice to meet you, and it's a great topic. Hey, he's doing well, and we're all very happy for him.
Yeah, but before we get started, I need to just pay credit to the legend Khalil Kayal who helped set this interview up. He knows who he is. This Ange guy, bit of a legend, isn't he?
He's certainly becoming that. He's done amazing things. You know, he's really reshaped the framework in Australian football, how Australians can view football, how Australians can perceive themselves in football. Um, when he really smashed the place down, even though he's been coaching for a long time in Australia and well known for a long time in Australia. But when he had the team at Brisbane about a decade ago now, it redefined a whole heap of things, and then, to be honest, has inspired a whole group of young coaches coming in immediately after him to try and achieve the standards or the style standards that he set, which has been profound. It's been really, really good to watch.
And he's certainly doing the same thing at Celtic now. We should say right now, before we get into this, that you're responsible for this, basically. You and Ange, written by Andy Harper. This is Ange's book, basically changing the game football in Australia through my eyes. I'm nearly finished it at this stage. It's very good. It's all about Ange's life up until about, 5 years ago. Lots of stuff in Australian football and the direction it should go in. That must have been fun, writing that with him.
It was, and it was whirlwind too. It was actually just in the room there. I'm talking to you from my home on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and Ange made a special trip up here. We had a couple of days just sitting, chewing the fat and recording the conversation. And the book, much like my relationship with Ange, pretty much came out of the blue. You know, we're not natural associates in as much as, you know, he's from Melbourne, I'm from Sydney. Our paths crossed very intermittently at football matches, competitive football matches, when I was playing and he was coaching, and vice versa. And the whole thing was pretty random, actually, except that it's not. Nothing with Ange is random. And he's done it with you, Hamish. He's done it with pretty much everyone at Celtic, I can assure you. He knows more about you than you know about yourself, and that's before he's even met you. And this is one of the keys to his success. You know, he puts a lot of time. He's got a natural sense for the type of people and the type of organisations that are going to work with and for him, and for whom he can work well. And he's done 90% of the work before he's even actually physically been somewhere or met someone. And so our relationship started because of that. And the book, which was just done in the next room here, came about because of that. It's got a great story to tell. And this, with you, is one of the more exciting chapters in a very exciting story so far. And we all believe there's more to come.
Yeah. Just before we move on, you mentioned you played football, cross paths. Who was a better player?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that hasn't really been contested. We played in different parts of the field. Ange had pretty much finished playing because of injury, even though he says of himself, he was always meant to be a coach more than a player, because he's been coaching since he was 11 years old. And so he'd packed up his playing career when I'd been coming through. We're similar vintage. He got started earlier than I did. And so then our interactions were, well, I was playing in teams against whom he was coaching. And then for some reason, he lassoed me literally out of really nowhere to join him. When he was the national youth coach of Australia in 2004, he had a trip with the national under-20s into Europe, France and Belgium. And he rang me completely out of the blue. I'd never actually met Ange at that point, apart from shaking hands at the end of games. We'd never spoken, apart from nice game, well done, or maybe not so nice, but whatever. That was the extent of the relationship. That's what I mean about Ange. For some reason, I'd started to be. I'd been a little bit active in the media at that point as a player, moving out of playing into post-playing career, which was at that point manifesting in coaching and a little bit of media stuff. So all this time is making these assessments from afar and doing whatever other homework. And then 2004 he's about to go on this tour and the phone rings and he introduces himself literally because we'd never really spoken and certainly not anything outside of the immediate confines of the full-time whistle, and said, "Do you want to come and manage this team for me whilst we go on this tour?" And that was the start of our relationship. And like I said, it was him first. He'd worked out who he'd wanted to meet. In this case, me. He worked out that there's some things that obviously been said and done that he thought, well, that's someone who might work in my environment. I had no idea any of this was taking place until the phone rings, and then we had a great couple of weeks, and that was the start of it. So we've been reasonably close ever since, with a degree of mutual respect. And of course, now I sit back in awe, not surprised, I must say, in awe of what he's achieving, and really grateful that other people are getting to see what many of us have seen for a long time.
Yeah, fascinating. He describes you as, I think, the only guy that could have written his book, which is a pretty big compliment, I would suggest. Can I just say, by the way, so many people on my social media complaining about not being able to get this book in Scotland. So if you want to make yourself a wee dollar, print some more and get them sent over here. Because honestly, they're like gold dust. You can't find them.
Is that right? Well, I might see if I've got I might have a little stash actually, Hamish, and that stash could be put on the market for the right price. You never know.
I got up early. I got them in the summer when he first came in. Now all the people are, jumping on the bus when he's doing well and they're struggling. So they get all they deserve, basically. As I say, it must have been fun. In the book, he talks about wanting that opportunity to manage in Europe at some stage, obviously, prior to coming to Celtic. Were you surprised when it was Celtic and Scotland?
Yeah, look, I was. Surprised because everything that he and many of us rail against was really epitomised by the reaction in Scotland, in Britain, and particularly with Celtic fans when his name was even first linked with the club. Forget about when they actually taken the plunge to sign him. And so a club of Celtic size, with everything they've got to lose, it did surprise me. Not because I ever had the remotest doubt that what would come to pass would come to pass, even though he hasn't sealed the deal completely yet. But I think from the vantage point we've got here and watching the way the team's playing and listening to the commentary, he's certainly achieved more than people thought was possible. He's achieved what we expected him to achieve. But I am surprised that a place like Celtic or anything comparable, and there's not many in the world, let's face it, but anything comparable would have taken what people considered to be the plunge. And this is a large part of Ange's raison d'etre and you would have heard him say it. He refuses to be defined by his geography. He wants to be judged by the content of his coaching. I know I'm dragging on that great Martin Luther King speech there, and I don't want to obviously compare the coaching career trajectory of a footballer with the civil rights movement in the USA, but it's that similar sort of paradigm that he wants to break down, because we in Australia, browbeaten as we are for being football people, actually have a pretty good feel for the game, and we know what makes the game tick. And Celtic have been, as one club, the on occasions has been the recipient of some of our football culture. Probably the greatest player that we've produced, in my opinion, Mark Viduka, was a great Celtic player.
I thought you were going to say Scott McDonald for a minute. I was about to correct you there.
Well, Scotty's done amazing as well, and he's doing great things back here too. Mm-hmm. I don't think he'd feel disrespected if I elevated Mark Viduka to. It's just a personal view anyway, but I'd be really surprised if Scotty Mac felt disrespected by that. He shouldn't, because Mark Viduka was something special. The point I'm making is that these guys, Scott McDonald, Mark Viduka, came out of that same cultural petri dish of Australian football, which produced really some serious quality and deep understanding for the game. Put it this way, if you wanted to follow the game in this country and have conversations about it, you had to work at it, right? It wasn't as though you'd go to the newspaper or the television and stuff. You're just being force-fed this, as in most countries in the world. And that had a really refining fire impact on the quality of the people who were produced out of that football culture, as browbeaten as it was. So, I mean, it's a long, I think you're expecting this, but it's a long-winded answer. We knew he could do it. The fact that Celtic fans, Scottish fans, British fans, by extension now Europeans, or soccer's old world, because they didn't know of Ange Postecoglou, didn't mean anything. All it meant was they needed to open the door and have their eyes opened.
He clearly enjoys proving people wrong, doesn't he? But do you think, honestly, it would have... I mean, he kind of puts a kind of brave face on it and says, I expected people to be asking who's Ange Postecoglou in Scotland when he was appointed. Do you think it did affect him?
It doesn't affect him, but it certainly motivates him. It irritates him. It irritates him, as it does us, that people can't put relevant context of things. That anyone who is considering what's Ange done, like why would we give him the keys to one of the biggest football brands in the world, a brand that's damaged in the recent history, which had fallen behind its great rivals, had one job to do. How quickly can we do that job to restabilise and have another crack at the old firm? And there wasn't a lot of hope circulating. That the club. This is just my reading. Now, I don't want to be treading on anyone's toes, but you read all this sort of stuff. There was no particular deep sense that this was achievable in the short term.
Yeah, you're right.
And certainly not with some Antipodean with a long surname, right? What's he ever done? But anyone who wants to look at what he did, maybe people will think the Australian context isn't reasonable. I dispute that. You're trying to make a silk purse with a sow's ear in Australia. Ange did that. He wins competitions in Australia in salary cap regulated competitions. When you just, unlike Celtic in relative terms, you can't just go out with a checkbook and buy the best talent. It's an equalised competition in Australia. So to have been so dramatically different from the rest of the competition when everyone's got similar resources is a big thing. However, if that's too much of a stretch for people, fair enough. Look at what he did in Japan. Japan is one of the most technical and competitive leagues going. It's fantastic to watch. To have won that with a team that's probably 60% up the food chain as far as resources are concerned compared to the big guys, it's phenomenal. It's not quite Leicester in the EPL because Yokohama F. Marinos have got a deeper history of success in Japan than maybe Leicester. But in that two-horse race, given the context, it's not that far off. It was incredible what he did there and the way in which he did it. And the way in which he did it has already borne fruit for Celtic because some of the people in Japan who are sitting back watching this team, like Kyogo, are thinking, mate, I'll have a piece of that if I get half a chance. Right? These are the tentacles of Ange. But outside of that, I mean, you're sort of asking people to go into the dark corners of world football to do some research on this guy. What about the World Cup in 2014? When he's playing in a group with the two finalists from South Africa 2010. They came out of that tournament without winning a game. So if your top-level research could say, well, he coached the national team in the World Cup, they didn't win. Can't be any good. You watch the games they played, particularly the first two games, and you can't but think, Jesus Christ, They had the world champion Dutch on the back foot with a team, even in Australia, a lot of the players, the fans hadn't really any idea. If you want to do some research on this guy and make a balanced judgment with the appropriate context, he more often than not comes out smelling roses. So to me, it was a surprise that Celtic had a crack at him. because from their side, they've got a lot to lose. From our side of it, watching this guy, what he's done with people, with young men, with football teams, mate, it was as sure a thing as you can get.
And you guys are so frustrating because you just tell us that we told you so. That's what you say for the last 6 months. But you clearly all feel it. When you see Ange dealing with the media, he's brutally honest, and you get the impression that everything he says is thought out. I've been at a few press conferences with him, and he never just says something for the sake of it. There's no filler with Ange. It's all stuff that's well thought out. Do you think that's a media tactic, or is that the way he is, away from the cameras?
It's everything. It's the way he is. He doesn't suffer fools. He thinks deeply about stuff. I mean, you think you might be widely read on any topic, and almost the guarantee is he's already read that book. He's already read that book about self-improvement, about leadership, about the great coaches in any sport. We were having a coffee one time, and someone recommended the book about the biography of Pat Riley, the LA Lakers coach in the NBA. And I said, I reckon Ange would be interested in this. And of course, he'd already read it. And that doesn't matter what you throw at him. I mean, this is not obviously completely true because we're not talking Einstein here, but invariably he's already thought about the topic that you're looking to cover. And so being so immersed in the direction he's set for himself and his team, like any good operator, he's already foreseen or tried to foresee and strategize around the potential potholes. So he sort of knows what's coming because he's thought about it. And what makes it endlessly humorous for him is that he's spent the time to think about this stuff, and a lot of the people who ask the questions haven't. So partly it's a taciturn response from a guy who's thought about a question that's coming. Do your homework. He doesn't say this, but it comes out in his answer. Do your homework. If you want to ask a question of material substance, great. Make sure you've thought about it, because I can guarantee you I have. But then the other part of it is a tactic. It's the way he manages people. It's the way he manages his players, his staff. He doesn't sit around after training, kicking back, having a snack and a chat. He doesn't pass the time in the professional environment with people. Other coaches are incredibly successful by being deeply personable with their players. And whilst Ange does adopt, this sort of fatherhood figure and does care deeply about his players, he does it in a really unusual way. And legion are the players who walk out of an Ange camp not even really knowing if Ange knows their name, not even really knowing if he's got any idea about their background. There's very little interface. Partly he does that so that he can cut the cord if he needs to. Partly he does that because that's the atmosphere he generates. And if he needs people, he needs people to go to war for him and the cause. And it is quite militaristic in its Spartan approach in that sense. But on the other hand, he is a deeply sensitive person who thinks deeply about pretty much anything that's relevant to a football team and the people around it.
Ryan McGowan told us a story about when he met Ange when he was playing. Ryan was playing for Sydney, I think, and he bumped into Ange. He must have been. In fact, I think he was at Yokohama at that stage in the Champions League. And then Ange spoke to him after the game for about 10 minutes, and Ryan had no clue what was going on because he'd never spoken to Ange for longer than about 10 seconds. So that's so well known over here now that Ange keeps his distance. In fact, we asked him about it at a press conference a couple of months ago, and he gave us this really great, in-depth answer. I think it's pretty well known that you like to keep your distance a little bit from the players. You don't go in the dressing room too much before matches. What are the benefits of that approach for Celtic? Is it to create leadership naturally? Is it more discipline?
It's just me, mate. It's just, I've always said that you've just got to be yourself. And even when I talk to young coaches, young managers, don't try and copy anyone else. Don't try and do what I do. This is just a natural fit for me. And I think the dressing room is just my belief. That's the players' domain. It's the players' area. They should be in charge. They should feel comfortable in there. They shouldn't have a 55 or 56-year-old cranky guy walking around telling them that they should pick their rubbish up or change the music on that they're playing. So it's about giving them their space. They're preparing for a game. I don't want to get in the way. I've done my bit during the week. My role then on game days to do other things, and even during the week. So that's just me. And like I said, it suits my personality. I've said before that most important thing I do on a daily basis is make decisions. If we're going to be successful, I've got to get more decisions right than wrong. The best way to do that is to get as much information as possible, but to also remain as objective as you possibly can. And every player in there and every staff member knows that I treat them equally with the same respect, have the same care and love for them all. There are no favourites. So they understand that, and that allows me then to make decisions that I think are best for the football club and best for us moving forward.
I want to chat about, how he's perceived kind of by friends and family. I remember one of the first things he said at Celtic was that his wife didn't think he's charismatic, but his press conferences, I would suggest he's quite charismatic.
I think he's getting better. No one's the finished article, and certainly isn't, even though he's very, very bloody good. But, he would say of himself, which is inspirational for the people around him, that he hasn't finished developing yet. So he's getting better as anyone in their line of work, if they're serious. You're always getting better until the time that you're not. And in Ange's book, the time that you're not is when it's time to move on. Now, he's very clearly on an upward trajectory. Part of that is dealing with the media. He knows. I mean, he doesn't need being told this. He's already realised this before anyone needs to tell him. A big part of succeeding in traditional football markets, where football is just such an avaricious beast, you've got to be able to manage the media, but he'll manage it on his terms. Like I said, he knows where he's going. He's already looked at the path ahead. Part of managing any sort of media in any walk of life is trying to anticipate what's coming, and so. In doing that, from the basis of having established very successfully an incredibly solid football foundation, it does give him a bit more license. But he's too smart to disrespect the license that he's earned for himself. And he'll be taking and educating people in the media, for those who want to be, along for the journey so that they can understand more about what he's trying to achieve. And again, that also helps him with his execution of that plan. I mean, he is an acutely intelligent man, and very focused on what he's doing.
Do you think he's enjoying himself? Have you had much contact to suggest he's enjoying himself in Scotland?
He's a pig in shit.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Quote. That's my quote, not his, but his quotes. He's exactly where he needs to be. They are his words. You've got to imagine everyone's got a great life story, I believe. When you arrive as a migrant in Australia, which is a pretty hostile, post-colonial British, we're still post-colonial really, incredibly strong British institutions. When you arrive as he did as a 4 or 5-year-old from Greece without speaking the language, having to navigate your way through a culturally pretty harsh and in some senses very barren, and certainly very monocultural set of institutions, and you set that course early, and you're buttressed, by your dad, whom he remembers with just such great affection, and the impact of his father on him has been life-defining. But that all set him up, and so it set him up because he needed to make a point, probably on behalf of his dad, actually. And that's one of the key fires that keeps burning. It's a beautiful thing to hear him talk. And Celtic, and I'm thankful for the sake of your guys that you've been able to get him. But if it wasn't going to be Celtic, it was going to be someone who would take, in their eyes, a leap of faith. As I only repeat, not from our eyes, it's a pretty bankable commodity. And where this is going to end up, who knows? But at the moment, and for the life of this relationship, he is exactly where he needs and wants to be.
Let's just investigate, where it's going to end up. Obviously, we don't know how the league's going to go this season. There's still work to be done. We're in the Scottish Cup as well. He could win a treble. He could end up with just the League Cup that he's won. I spoke to one of his former players recently, and he told me that Ange's big goal at Celtic won't be domestic based. It will be achieving something big in Europe. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I think Celtic will be the big beneficiaries of that. Yeah, what's to come out of this season? Has he already won this season? Even if in the eyes of even if he doesn't win another couple of trophies, has he won in the eyes of the fans, or have they come so far? Yeah, you really? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
it's not a case that they've come so far that to lose, quote unquote, to lose it from now would be he'd lose some skin over that.
I think it would certainly be disappointing, but he'll be the manager of Celtic next year, and I would suggest he would still have the full backing of the Celtic support, regardless of how the end of this season goes. But that's just my opinion. People watching this may disagree.
So he'll have a view. And again, the only predictors we could even possibly put on Ange, because he's his own cat, and he's so outstanding because he's so different from the rank and file. He's an outlier. He's exciting. He's not part of the orthodoxy. It's what makes his approach and his achievements so tasty and so outstanding. And a club that wants to slipstream that can gain a lot. But in bringing that on board, a football club or a national team organisation that brings that on board needs to realise that he's not going to settle for the orthodoxy. You've brought someone from outside the orthodoxy in, and you see how it works and you back him, but you need to back him in the full realisation that the end game isn't more orthodoxy. So the end game for Ange in this is most certainly, at the least, Europe, because that's outside the paradigm of contemporary orthodoxy, I would suggest, respectfully, in Scottish football. I mean, the cup-winning Celtic team, which is 50 years ago now. Now, obviously, the economics around Scottish football and the trajectory of international leagues, they've gone in separate directions, blah, blah, blah. But let me tell you something. As with his geography not being a delimiter, he won't want to be a delimiter. He won't want the relative financial robustness, competitiveness of Scottish football to mark what he can do with this team. So that's going to define what he does in the transfer market. It'll define what he does on every Saturday afternoon in the league. But that's not the orthodoxy that he's striving for. He doesn't do something just to be comfortable and slip into the orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And so most certainly to elevate Celtic outside of the rigours of Saturday by Saturday league football, but with the economics that determine the type of player he can have in that structure, he won't think he's succeeded until he's made a mark in Europe with your football club. And it's going to be a hell of a ride, but don't expect it to be orthodox.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so exciting about it. We have no way where it's going to go. We have no idea, where the glass ceiling is for Celtic under Ange. This is a guy, as you say, who took Australia to a World Cup and tried to attack, and did attack, three of the best teams in the world. I mean, Chile were the poorest team, out of the three, and they were brilliant with, let's face it, fairly limited players, apart from maybe, Tim Cahill and a couple of others. So I think we're in for a hell of a ride. Final question, how elite a manager do you think Celtic have right now?
Top of the tree. I said a few years ago in these sorts of discussions with people, across world sport, not just football, but any sport, when you're talking about the art of coaching, Ange Postecoglou is in the top couple of percent. No question in my mind. The art of coaching. Forget the technical issues with different sports. But he could sit down in a room with the very best in any of the world's big sports, not just football, and be at home. He could be at home again because, and people confuse this. He talks about, that's the way I like my football to be played. Well, okay, he's an aesthete. He does like the aesthetics of football. But I tell you what he likes more than that is winning.
Yeah.
This is the way he thinks it's the best to win, to make the point. Now, there are a few people in the world of, we'll just bring it back to football. Now, there are a few people in the world of football who have balls like that. Most are just happy to work within the confines, work within the orthodoxy, and hope for the best. And that's not Ange. And so when you ask, what sort of pedigree have you got here? I very comfortably say, hand on heart, without fear or favour, that from a coaching practitioner's viewpoint, a leader of a dressing room, an identifier of talent and character, a fortifier of team mechanics, you got someone at the very top of the tree.
And if we win the league this year, we'll be in the Champions League next year. He will be in the company of, your Guardiolas and your Jurgen Klopps and managers like that. And I agree with you. I think he's just completely devoted to football, knows what he wants. He's so at home when he's in the football environment. And I just think we've got a hell of a manager here. This book is excellent. This isn't an advert for the book, by the way, but it is really good. It really does take you inside the mind of Ange, which I guess is the whole point in doing that. But it's fascinating. Just find a way to ship some over to me. I'll take a wee cut and then I'll pass them on to all our willing people. Andy, it's been a pleasure to chat to you. I really do appreciate your time, and hopefully, there's more good times to come.
And my pleasure. Cheers to everyone, and enjoy him while you got him. That's all I'd say.